But thank you all for being here with us today, and how timely that we are having this webinar on the first day that the government is reopened. That was some nice timing, but while they are reopened, I do think that there is going to be a period of operational recovery. So we don't know how quickly we'll get updates on various grant programs, but the government is back open, so that's certainly a good sign for all of us grant seekers. Let me share my presentation. Okay, so a quick overview of Simple Grants. We are a full service grant consulting firm. We work with clients of all shapes and sizes across the U.S. Our team is spread out across the U.S. as well, and we currently serve clients in 24 states. So we have had a really unique vantage point from which to watch, all of these changes at the federal level and at the state levels unfold. So we wanted to host this webinar today to help our clients and all interested parties understand how to be grant ready now in this changing environment. So a quick overview of the agenda for today. We'll go over the 2026 grant landscape, federal signals and state alignment, and key policy shifts to watch. What grant ready looks like now in this environment, put together a 90-day readiness roadmap, and then we'll go over common readiness gaps, a grant lifecycle overview, and then common components of a grant proposal. Some quick housekeeping. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom or side of your screen, wherever your control panel is for the webinar, and I will try to see those live and answer them. We will, at the end of the presentation, have a live Q&A session. So if you have questions you want to wait until the end and come on and ask those live, you're welcome to do that, or submit them throughout the presentation. We also have a resources link that you can go to, and it has a grant ready checklist that we've put together for you. We'll also include that in the follow-up email after the presentation. And there's also a scheduling link if you want to schedule a free consultation with us to discuss your specific questions. You're welcome to do that, but all of that will be sent out via email after the presentation. So let's move right into the content. Okay, there we go. Okay, the 2026 grant landscape, navigating a realigned federal environment. So federal policy reset is still shaping programs. We have seen so many changes this year. The early 2025 executive orders reoriented agencies towards merit-based criteria and specifically removed certain things like DEI framework, as well as other changes that we continue to see for FY26 NOFOs that come out. So when you're looking at opportunities to pursue and competitions that you want to compete in, you need to check eligibility language, of course, scoring factors, and required assurances that can look very different than prior cycles from the previous administration. So the pauses and restarts and the continuing resolution shutdown really equals compressed timelines. All of this has interrupted normal award cadences. We've seen shortened NOFO windows, and when I say NOFO, that's the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It could be called something different, and could be an RFA, NOFA. We like to call it Simple Grants, the guidance, because agencies call it different things, but it's essentially the instructions for how to compete for that competition. But we have seen certainly shortened windows to respond and get applications in, and some delayed launches. We've seen rural and tribal competition, for instance, took the prior year funding and added it to the current year. So every agency is handling those matters a little different, and you've got to stay in tune to each agency and what they're doing as far as timelines and opening back up. Surprisingly, we've seen a lot of grant competitions still be open during this shutdown. Some grant portals were completely down and others went down for a period and came back up. Just Grants, we know, opened back up and has still been accepting applications. So it's a little different for each agency, but just expect shorter lead time from notice to deadline, and that just really highlights the importance of having your budgets, match letters, narratives, all of the stuff we're going to discuss today on how to be grant ready, having that ready to go. Infrastructure, workforce, energy, and broadband remain top national investment areas. DOT has continued to report on allocations and obligations across highways, transit, safety, and discretionary programs. Let me add too that we've really got a mixed audience. We've got a lot of local governments, but we've got some local education agencies and 2- and 4-year institutions of higher education as well. So I'll try to make my comments broad, but obviously some of the things that I mentioned won't apply to all audiences. But we have seen DOT keeping up their reporting to us. So the core programs that we're used to seeing have remained operational. FEMA preparedness, USDA, rural broadband, and commerce, tech, economic development programs continue to operate with amended or staged opportunities. So even amid federal uncertainty, many of the bread and butter programs remain viable for 2026. Think public safety, water, broadband, regional growth, all of those things. State alignment is tightening to federal signals. We'll talk about that more on the next slide, but it certainly matters for proposals that demonstrate measurable outcomes that are tied to federal and state priorities are going to score better. And then macroeconomic impact of the shutdown underscores urgency. These agencies are going to be moving quickly to get the funding out the door. And we need to make sure that we are ready to respond once those applications do open, because again, it's going to be tight timelines. Federal signals and state alignment. Federal direction drives local strategy. States continue aligning with federal priorities. Again, that's infrastructure, workforce, domestic manufacturing, and energy independence. The big shift for 2026 is how closely states are mirroring those federal priorities. Governors and agency directors are aligning scoring criteria for their grants with the national focus. Also good for us grant seekers, matching requirements and cost share documentation are becoming more consistent nationwide, which will certainly be helpful. Programs tied to IIJA, CHIPS, and rural broadband remain active but have refined eligibility. So again, check those things again when the program comes out. States are prioritizing projects with measurable return on investment. Think jobs created, investment leveraged, and infrastructure outcomes. The National Governors Association's 2025 brief on state infrastructure policy confirms that virtually every state is emphasizing deliverability and measurable ROI. Some quick examples from states where we do a lot of business. Alabama's broadband program now scores applicants on cost per connection and local match. Tennessee has tied industrial corridor grants directly to job creation, and Florida's resilience planning mirrors federal flood mitigation formulas. So understanding your state's scoring framework will help predict where you're going to rank in that competition. And what it means for local governments is if you understand your state's alignment, you can forecast how competitive your project will be before you even apply, and make sure that you are aligning as best you can to those priorities. So map your projects to your state scoring priorities, and you're going to be in a much better position once FY26 NOFOs open. Some key policy shifts to watch: what's driving 2026 federal and state priorities. Infrastructure modernization and permitting reform remain top federal mandates. The 2026 policy picture continues to focus on tangible economic outcomes. You're going to see more grants tied to infrastructure efficiency, workforce capacity, and domestic production, all backed by permitting reform meant to accelerate implementation. So, again, moving fast. Workforce upskilling tied directly to industry demand and domestic production. Energy independence and rural broadband expansion, manufacturing incentives, expanding through CHIPS and regional economic programs, and again, emphasis on that return on investment, compliance, and fiscal transparency. Transparency and accountability language is going to appear in nearly every NOFO that you see come out. So knowing this in advance, we are advising our clients to invest now in documentation systems and baseline data collection so that you can show that measurable impact once the application opens. So that's a quick overview of the current landscape and what we see coming in 2026. So knowing that, what grant ready looks like now, and internal readiness is really going to determine that external success. So what is grant readiness? It means your organization can act immediately when a funding window opens. When agencies talk about grant readiness, they're talking about you being able to move tomorrow morning if the NOFO drops tonight. Again, you may have a 4-week window. I've seen even shorter than that. So, being prepared is key. Agencies want applicants who can execute immediately, not those who are going to be starting from scratch once the funding is announced. And readiness isn't writing. It's actually your internal structure and making sure that's ready. Your finance office, public works, admin team, everyone should know who owns which part of a submission. You've got folks who will need to be in charge of the budget, who's getting the signatures, who's going to oversee compliance, and building that into your program development on the front end will help so much if you get the award. Who's drafting the narrative? All of this stuff you need to have identified before the program even opens. A solid internal structure with assigned leads, shared calendars, and current documentation increases your eligibility and competitiveness drastically. So some key internal systems that you do need to look and have in place: strategic plan aligned to funding priorities. Again, what this administration is going to look for and where that funding is going to be. So know which of your projects align best with that, and move those towards the top, at least for competing for competitive funds. You need a centralized grant tracker and document library. Somebody needs to be in charge of which grants you want to pursue and keep those in a list somewhere. One of our most popular services is a comprehensive grant strategy. And I see a lot of people on this call who have that with us and are in various phases of implementing that strategy. But you can predict in advance when these competitions will come out. A lot of grants come around again and again with just different deadlines and maybe different priorities. We're waiting on DOT right now to release their big build grant program, formerly called RAISE. And each administration changes the priorities for it, and it's gone from build to RAISE and to RAISE and now back to build. So we're waiting for that to come out this month. We met with program officers before the shutdown who said statutorily that competition has to be announced and open in November. Now, I don't know if there's some mechanism whereby they can move that because of the shutdown. I would assume not. So we expect that to come out any day, but we have known that it would come out this time of year all year. And that is a very large infrastructure grant that you can plan for well in advance. And it has, in all of the past cycles, required a benefit cost analysis, something that you could be planning in advance and getting all of that documentation together before the competition opens, and you're going to be in a much better place. So if you have a centralized grant tracker where hey, we're interested in this opportunity, and we expect it's going to open this time of year, you can start having those conversations early and pulling in partners together, and you'll be in a much better position. A document library, a place where all of your grant ready documents, the things that are in that checklist that we sent you, can live. And, you don't want everyone in the world to have access, but it is good if more than just one person has access and knows where all of these things live, because what if that person, gets sick or is out, and, somebody else on the team needs to be able to come in and find that documentation. But having it somewhere where you can share it, even in just a, Google Drive shared file, any place where it's compiled and organized is key. You need to have current budgets, any audits that you may need to submit, and match documentation in place. And again, assign leads for each project or department. If you know that it's going to be multiple people having input in that application, who is the lead for each partner or each department? And go ahead and put that on paper where it's clear who is responsible for what element of the application. So active communication among your leadership, finance, and operations. According to the Government Finance Officers Association, organizations that maintain current budgets, audits, and match documentation are 40% more likely to complete applications on time. I can't tell you how devastating it is when you have put so much effort into putting an application together and it doesn't get submitted for whatever reason. It's, real morale killer, and not to mention the time and cost associated with that waste. So being organized and getting that application submitted well in advance will increase your competitiveness. The Grant Professionals Association and OMB Uniform Guidance both emphasize internal controls, having documented policies for cost allocation, procurement, and reporting. So having all of this documentation in place before you even start competing for grants is suggested, because it's going to be necessary to have those things should you get a federal award. Small towns struggle with this sometimes, that don't have, multiple personnel who can be dedicated to this sort of effort. But even one shared spreadsheet and designating who's taking lead on what aspects of an application can count. So it doesn't require new staff, just organization. List open grants, renewal dates, and assign responsibility. Documentation is the new currency. Agencies reward preparedness and compliance. Federal reviewers want assurance that your project can start, spend, and report without compliance risk. The more you can demonstrate that, the more competitive you're going to be. So before these 2026 cycles open, hold a 1-hour readiness check-in with your core team. We'll talk more about that on the next slide for the 90-day readiness roadmap. But even just that 1 hour can save you weeks of time and stress later. This is a quick 90-day readiness roadmap that we put together. You start with days 1 through 30, and the goal of this roadmap is to turn grant readiness into something you can actually measure. Even a small team can be ready by following these phases. Days 1 through 30, assess and audit. Start with visibility. Most delays come from not knowing where documents or approvals sit. So use this month to inventory projects, check your SAM UEI status, fix small administrative gaps now while there's no deadline pressure. I'll use a quick example of a small town that brought us on probably 6 weeks ago. They were waiting to receive a grant and were actually about to lose the grant because they couldn't get their SAM information updated and registered properly in grants.gov. They had moved office locations, and so it was an address conflicting issue. And the poor person there who called us had been rejected 17 times. He was at his wit's end. He had tried for weeks just to get that registration going. And registration has been especially difficult since the switch from DUNS to UEI. For various reasons, the systems don't propagate quickly. And if you've got one misplaced comma or something, very small and minor, it can reject your application. But he came to us and we were able to get that resolved in actually 2 days. I don't know how we did it because we have 2 people on our team who know how to work their magic. And I think they know those help desk people by first name. But if you do, I say all of this because you think that should be something very easy, but it's oftentimes not. And we have seen instances where people have their entire application ready to go, or like in this instance where the gentleman was waiting to receive funds that he had already been awarded and was going to lose those funds because he couldn't get this registration in place. So don't wait on this step. Make sure that you are properly registered now and well in advance of submitting any application. So you'll want to inventory all active and planned projects, verify SAM and UEI registration status, gather budgets, audits, and match documentation, and identify any internal bottlenecks, approvals, signatures, procurement. If you know that it's going to take a week or two to get a signature on a document, go ahead and get that started first. And especially if you need letters of support, anything from folks outside of your organization, put that stuff towards the beginning of your application assembly process, because those sort of delays can really be problematic at the end when it's outside of your organization's control. So consider those things, and again, know who is going to be in charge of that. So the second month, days 31 through 60, organize and assign, define roles and systems. There's needs to be a clear responsibility for budget tracking and reporting correlation with on-time spending. For smaller towns, again, one shared spreadsheet and a few calendar reminders can meet that, but update policies and cost allocation procedures. Those manuals can already be ready to go and in place. Create or refresh your grant tracking system, assign leads for finance, narrative, and reporting, and schedule a mock internal deadline 2 weeks before typical NOFO close so that you can have a run through of what it's really going to look like for you when you're running on that deadline. Make sure you thought through everything. Days 61 through 90, rehearse and refine. Run a mock application using a recent NOFO. This reveals where narrative, data, or approvals break down. OMB uniform guidance now requires stronger financial and performance reporting, so practice in advance uses the risk of technical rejection later. Conducting this dry run application using a past NOFO, update your data and metrics for anticipated 2026 programs, prepare reusable project briefs and boilerplate content. We'll talk about that on our last slide because we do know common components of applications and things that you could go ahead and have in place that's going to make it much easier to assemble applications. And then review the readiness checklist with leadership for sign off. So build momentum in short, achievable sprints. Every phase ends with a visible deliverable, a completed inventory, a defined ownership chart, and a ready to submit mock application. That's what keeps teams engaged and ready when these funding cycles do open for 2026. We'll list some common readiness gaps, what slows applicants down and how you can fix it. Expired or mismatched registrations. I just gave you an example there. But that misalignment is the number one avoidable rejection. I have information here that says registration errors are the most frequent culprit. According to GAO's 2025 review of federal grant management, more than 20% of submissions were delayed or rejected because of expired SAM registrations or mismatched UEI information. Takes about 2 weeks to fix these. That's longer than some NOFO windows. Depending on the problem, it can take that long. So again, I can't emphasize enough, do that first. Make sure your registrations are current. Out-of-date budgets or unsupported match commitments. Fragmented communication between finance, public works, and administration. No centralized grant calendar or document system. Dependence on one person for all grant activity. Weak performance data. This is a big one that I see often. No clear outcomes or baselines. And then a reactive culture, starting the grant search after the announcement. You know, if you are finding out about the opportunity and the window's already open, you're kind of late. So the more you can prepare in advance for what you want to pursue, the better. And again, one person dependency. Don't have one person being in charge of all of your grant documents and submitting. Many times we've had folks who are registered, but they don't know who their AOR, their authorized organizational representative, the person who is authorized to submit. So even if you're registered, make sure you know who that person is and have a contingency for if he or she may not be available the day you're trying to submit and what you will do there. So moving to a grant life cycle overview, and I like this slide because it helps you think about the grant process as a whole in its different phases. We put this together years ago, and it's something that we like to include in any trainings that we do so people can really think about each of these individual aspects, but then also how they come together, and each part of the grant process supports the next. So we'll start in the top left quadrant with pre-award phase. So this is where you're analyzing that guidance, the NOFO, whatever they call it. You're analyzing the solicitation and making sure that you are eligible, that you're able to meet any priority preference points that they have if you can, but assessing whether it is a good fit and you're going to be competitive, because you don't want to spend all of the time putting an application together and getting it submitted for a program where you really don't have a good chance at competing. Budget and program formation. This is where you start thinking about, what are all of the aspects of the program that you need to do, and do you have the budgets in place for those? What are all of the things that you'll need that they're going to ask for in that grant application, having that ready? You're building relationships here. You're monitoring opportunities and making strategic alignments. If you need a community partner, some of our school systems have been going after the Farm to Schools grant recently through USDA, and that requires several community partners. Knowing who those are and starting those conversations early are key. So in this pre-award phase, you want to build relationships and then do all of your grant writing, whatever that solicitation requires, that you've checked all of the boxes and are making sure that your proposal is not going to be rejected because you didn't submit a form that you've needed. We have seen that. Folks come to us many times because they've been through that experience, a missing 501c3 declaration letter, and they've got kicked out of a competition, and it can be very painful. So going through that solicitation and checking all of the boxes and make sure that you have everything you need. And then you get the award. Congratulations. And sometimes condolences if you're not prepared. So the more you can be grant ready and prepare for when you win, the smoother the process is going to be. So during your period of performance, you've got your work plan development. Anytime we're asked to engage in a project, whatever it is, if it's grant writing or grant management, even grant research, we put together detailed work plans, and we put together hourly estimates by each deliverable. That's how we work on an hourly basis, but it's helpful to do that even if you aren't using outside help, because you need to know how much time and effort it's going to take so that you can go in and schedule accordingly. People often underestimate how long putting an application together, or similarly on the back end, some compliance measures take longer. So develop that work plan and know how long it's going to take and who's responsible for what. And build consensus on your team around all of this so it's very clear. And then you hopefully have the award notice and contract review. Read through that contract, because once you sign that, that's what you've committed to do. And you want to make sure that you fully understand that and that you've got internal controls and procedures in place. I like to tell our clients that the best way to get a grant is to do a good job with the grant that you have. Agencies talk to each other, and if somebody does not perform well, that will spread, and you could certainly even be debarred from doing business with the government, or other red flags that will come up and prevent you from getting future awards. But doing a good job on the grant will put you in a better position for future funding. So management is extremely important. And you want to build trust with finance and program data collection, your file maintenance. Build trust with your funder and those on your team. Your finance reports, your program reports, all of this needs to be submitted in a timely fashion, but also in accordance with whatever method they want to see their reporting. You know, oftentimes they'll have their own spreadsheet. You may collect the data one way, but they want it produced to them in another way. So if you know that up front, you can build your systems so that when it comes time to submit those reports, you have gathered it in such a way that it's going to come together much easier and how they want to see it. And so then moving over into the post-award phase, tell your story, document these successes so that you can use them in a next grant application and show, hey, we received this grant and this is what we did with it. And that's going to build, trust and confidence in the person who's reviewing that application. So make sure you do document your success and that you close out and have your final report on time. But be audit ready. Don't just wait until it's time to get the audit to start preparing for that. If you plan with the audit in mind from the very beginning, you're going to have those documents in place, and it's not going to be a big undertaking when it is audit time because you've prepared for that. And of course, record retention. So having the policies and procedures in place that we discussed is going to help throughout the entire cycle. And all of this just continues because you may be in the middle of one grant and applying for another. So this is something that is just a continuous life cycle. But I think this graphic shows it in such a way that helps folks think about what they need to be doing at each phase. And these are some common components of a grant proposal. So when we talk about having your grant file ready to go, some of these narratives you can go ahead and have in place, especially things like agency background and experience. You know, that's not really going to change, although you may want to highlight certain experience above others, depending on the funder that you're going to. But these are the typical things that you're going to see in a grant proposal. And having some of this narrative already ready to go, your statement of need, for instance, and having your budget, evaluation plan if the grant requires that, sustainability plan. We see that pretty often with grant applications. So be thinking through how you could answer that and having some narrative already in place. Any required attachments, those are unique for every competition, but you'll see that in the guidance or the NOFO and making sure those are there. Resumes are an example of that. You don't want to wait and have to gather that at the last minute when those are things that you could already have in a file. If you're a nonprofit, a list of your board of directors, and we tell people to have two lists, have one with their names, business affiliations, and contact information, and another without the contact information. Some require you submit the actual contact information, so having that list ready to go is very helpful. So this is just a list of common components that we do see in a grant proposal, and with that, we will move over to discussion Q&A. I am going to change the view here so I come back on. And if you have questions you would like to ask, now is the time. You can submit them again through the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we will bring you on live. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come through. I'm guessing I just answered everything. Oh, I see a heart. Okay, maybe I did. Okay, here comes a question in the Q&A. And thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. As part of grant readiness, do you have an assessment tool to see if the work is worth the final award? Let me make sure I understand this. I understand exactly what you're asking, and I don't know that we have a set tool because it's really a subjective analysis each time. So, if you know that you have never managed a federal award before and you don't know if you're going to have the capabilities to do this, um, that's certainly something you want to consider before competing. But, if you're a local government, I'm not sure um, what kind of entity you're working with, Aaron, but you're going to want to compete for federal awards. So it would make sense to have these things in place. And most federal awards are going to require quarterly programming, both fiscal and programmatic. Now, they may want an external evaluator to come in as part of that. And if you decide that that's just, too much of an effort, it's really a subjective analysis internally. Now, the amount of the award does matter very much. We have recently had a client decide they wanted to give back a $100,000 award to their state just because the requirements were becoming so overly burdensome, and those weren't clearly stated on the front end. Unfortunately, with grants, that can happen. But that's a really good question, and I want to think more if we could maybe develop a tool that would help folks walk through that decision-making process. But it really is very subjective and on a case-by-case basis. But I would definitely say the dollar amount of the award is something that is a major consideration. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see, someone asking, do you happen to have a list of federal grants available at this time? So, Alan, certainly grants.gov is one database that you can search in. I know it's not very easy to go through, but that really is the best list of what's open at this point in time. And then you'll need to spend some time. You can search by agency or keyword, but you'll have to spend some time in each of those competitions documents, the guidance, the NOFO, to really decide if it's a good fit for you. That's why, unfortunately, even just having a list of what's available isn't too helpful unless you know those programs very well. And grant research is something we spend a ton of time doing because you do really have to understand each of those programs and your client's need to decide if it's a good fit and someone's going to be competitive. But for federal grants, it's not perfect. They don't always have every opportunity listed, but grants.gov is going to be a database where you can check and see the federal programs that are open right now. Someone's asking, are we able to get the slides? Yes. These slides and the recorded presentation will come out at the end of this presentation with a survey, if you don't mind answering that for us, but it'll have the grant ready checklist and then it'll be the slides as well. Someone asked, how many grants are awarded each year on average in Alabama to small businesses? Oh, wow, Mary, I don't know that off the top of my head. And I will say too that most of our work is with local governments, school systems, and nonprofits, tax exempt organizations, although we do have a few business clients in the manufacturing space. But I can't say on average how many grants have been awarded to small businesses. I will see if I can find some additional information on that, but there's all sorts of different programs too. So there's going to be state programs that will award grants to small businesses, federal programs by agency, but I do not have that data. Any more questions?
Hi, Jessica. I have one in chat from Alan Wobler.
Okay, let me scroll. Oh, I think I answered that. Do you happen to have a list of federal grants available? Okay. And yes, I see another question about the checklist and slides. Those will be emailed after this presentation. Here comes another. How important is it that for city government departments that receive grant be ready for audit. Very important. If you receive over $750,000, there will be, you'll need to have an audit. So making sure that your audit ready on the front end is key. You're very welcome. Lots of thank yous. It's exciting to see all the folks that have joined us, and I know it's a mix of organizations, but hopefully this is helpful to everyone. And again, if you want to schedule a time to meet with us one-on-one and ask specific questions, you can certainly do that. There's a scheduling link in the resources, and then also we'll send that out in the follow-up email as well. And I see, how has the focus on compliance readiness increased from the OMB federal level? Great question, Brittany. So 2 CFR has always, been 2 CFR 200, what we look to for compliance. And going by those standards is key and has been always for federal grants. But this administration has said that they are going to put specific emphasis on requirements and compliance. So I think the program officers are going to be diligent in coming in and checking documentation and making sure that you do have what you need for compliance with 2 CFR 200 and any agency supplementals. FEMA, for instance, or many agencies, not just FEMA, will have supplemental guidance that will expand on 2 CFR 200. So it's definitely key to understand all of those rules and regulations before you sign that grant contract, and make sure that you are okay with doing everything that's going to need to be done from a compliance standpoint at that level. So this administration is saying that they're putting a huge emphasis on that. You're welcome. All right, any more questions coming through? I'm seeing some thank yous, but no more questions. All right, and again, if you want to schedule with us, you're welcome to do that. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope this information was helpful, and happy grant seeking now that the government is back open. So we'll all get back on this roller coaster, and hopefully we won't be going through this again at the end of January. So thanks again for coming, and have a great rest of your day.